Fathers who abandoned your families. Why did you do it? I was 20 when my daughter was born, living about 4.5 hours away from home, friends, family, and everything familiar. I never wanted to be a dad, thanks to a pretty crummy upbringing. When things took a turn for the worse in the relationship, I left. I knew I couldn't survive up there on my own. I was young, immature, with a lousy job, so I left during a heated argument in the middle of the night. I kind of just escaped. I pushed her out of my mind and did things on my own terms. I paid child support when I could, sent birthday presents, maybe made a phone call every once in a while. There was no father daughter relationship. When you're several states away and never see her, it's a lot easier to pretend she didn't exist. Having no connection made it easier. I lived my own life without much thought about her. This went on for a few years. I moved to the West Coast, and during a trip back home on the East Coast, I decided to visit her. I remember crashing on my ex's couch and being woken up by a tiny person. She was 4 at this point. Her mother and I both agreed that I wouldn't bring up who I was or try to act like her dad. Just to spend the day with her and enjoy ourselves. It was incredibly awkward for me at first, but slowly things fell into place. Watching her stumble in winter boots, listening to her tell stories, trying new foods like a lemon poppy seed muffin, dancing while we waited for the bus, it was surreal. Thanks to another encounter with an employee at American Eagle, she called me Dad. In that moment, I locked eyes with her. Then her mom. It felt warm, beautiful, and loving. We both ignored the comment, but inside I was overwhelmed with emotion. We spent the rest of the day goofing around and assembling a bed. After we put her to bed, her mom and I talked for a few hours. After everything that happened that day, I realized I needed to be there. I'll skip most of the details, but the visit happened in October 2010, and I made plans to live there by 2012. I moved back home from California, worked several jobs, saved money, and planned everything meticulously so I wouldn't have to leave again. In December 2011, I moved up north. Our relationship was essentially friendship for a few months. She didn't have a father figure in her life, and I wasn't about to drop a, "Hey, surprise! I'm the dad you've been missing." In the beginning, it was her coming over for a Friday night sleepover or random park trips while I figured out how to be a dad. It was intense and the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm still learning, as I think every dad never stops figuring things out. I eventually told her who I was, and it wasn't this big emotional moment. I was just her dad, and she was happy to finally have one around. She doesn't realize I was missing for most of her childhood, and it's a conversation I'm not looking forward to having. I'll be honest and upfront, and hopefully, by then, she'll understand how much I regret it. If not, then I'll work on patching everything up. I won't quit this time. Our relationship is perfect now. I have partial custody. She stays with me half the week. We have paint fights, bake cakes, play flashlight tag. My life is just amazing, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I can't criticize the deadbeat dad label because I was one. I totally understand the mentality of not caring about your kid because I was that guy. I want to say it was immaturity and fear of fatherhood that held me back. But who knows? I'm sure it's different for everyone. Story 2. When I was young, I suffered a traumatic brain injury. Now, in my 30s, I am dealing with the after effects of that event. I confuse easily, and my memory is falling apart in little pieces. I have to ask people to repeat themselves often because their words make no sense to me the first and sometimes the second time around. Like gibberish. I have sleep disorders, severe clinical depression, and almost no control over my emotions. I wasn't always like this. I was a husband and a father to 4 kids. I was married for 12 years. One morning, after a fight with my then wife, I tried to unalive myself. I was in a psychiatric ward for around 8 days, and when I was released, I was picked up by an advocate and driven to the airport to fly back to our home state to seek help with my mental health. 2 months after arriving, I received divorce papers in the mail. So, I'm not a part of my children's lives because I'm becoming more and more unbalanced each passing year. I'm 33 years old. I am losing my memories, and I have absolutely no control over my emotions. I understand why she did it. I don't want my kids to find their daddy missing because he decided to unalive himself. I guess it's not fair of me to want to be back in their life. All I ever wanted was to be a father and a husband. But because of my problems that won't go away, I was sent on a plane 3,000 miles away from the only things I cared about. I know I'm a burden. I know that I'm getting worse. The thought never occurred to me that the mother of my children would abandon me. I wouldn't have done it to her. Not like this. I'm so sorry to anyone who has to live without a dad. I want to be a father to my children. But that was taken away from me when I was thrown from a car and suffered a traumatic brain injury. I don't get to have that life anymore because the woman I was with for 16 years decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Story 3. I was a young 20-year-old virgin student. She was 18 years old and bipolar. Just 2 months into our relationship, she tried to overdose on Xanax. I rushed her to the emergency room where she ended up in the psychiatric ward. I continued to visit her for another few months because she was my first girlfriend, the first girl I had sexy times with, and I had codependency issues. We did it again when she got out of the psychiatric ward and she ended up pregnant. I panicked and insisted on a termination. Initially, she agreed, but then she changed her mind and got angry at me for suggesting it. I didn't know what to do, so I bought her an engagement ring because I thought it was the right thing to do. My parents convinced me that it was dumb to marry a girl I'd only known for 4 months just because of a baby, especially one with mental health issues. So I backed out. She ended up really hating me after that, and when summer came, we both went home thousands of miles away from each other. I was ashamed, so I didn't tell anyone about the baby except for my immediate family. It was easier to just pay the child support and pretend that nothing happened. Eventually, years passed, and with each passing year, it felt more and more awkward to try to make contact. I would occasionally cyberstalk the mother, and I found out that she had recovered from her mental illness and become a great mom who met a great guy that she ended up marrying. It's now 15 years later, and my daughter is thriving. Judging by Facebook pictures, I wouldn't mind if she wanted to reach out to me, but at this point, I would just be intruding on their happy lives to reach out to them. Just a quick side note. If you like the content and like listening to our stories, smash the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Now, back to the stories. Story 4. I came back from a tour to find out my wife was pregnant. I was 99% sure the baby wasn't mine because things had been rocky for months before I deployed. Our relationship had a dead bedroom. I asked her directly about it. She started off being defensive and accusatory, but eventually she confessed. She had been sleeping with a friend of mine while I was gone, intending to get pregnant. I asked for a test and she laughed at me, which was proof enough for me. I filed for divorce and she delayed the process. She also let her friends and family know about it, but claimed I was leaving her because I didn't want to raise my child. The story reached my family, and despite explaining the situation, they said they would disown me if I left her. They even tried to use the PTSD narrative that was around in the news about military stuff, suggesting that my background meant I was damaged and should just accept being trapped by someone I once loved. I was stressed, but I am not an idiot. Not long after, I grabbed whatever I could as quickly as possible and I left. If I ever go back, I'll face criminal charges because I am being held legally responsible for a life that cannot possibly be mine. There is still no tests, and at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if one had been produced and tampered with to support the lie. I think it will catch up with me one day, but until then, I am living okay elsewhere. What she did was wrong, and I refuse to give in. I would rather die or have my legs broken than willingly support a woman who tried to get me to raise a child that was a result of her own deception. She may get to me eventually, but by then it will be too late. She is not getting the payout she planned on. Instead, she is raising a child alone. Although I left her with a compelling sub story, obviously, if or when the sword finally falls, it will just be so she can feel like she finally got me. She pointlessly ruined both of our lives with this nonsense. I would have given her a child upon my return. I just didn't want to impregnate her and then die, leaving my unborn child fatherless. I am never going to forgive her for that. Story 5. I feel there is a slight possibility I have a 3-year-old child. I had a one night stand over 4 years ago. I met her at a bar through a friend of a friend of a friend. We had no mutual friends, and a couple of months later, she was pregnant. We were using a condom, but she told me to take it off because she was on the pill. I did, but I never climaxed. So, I feel like the chances she got pregnant that night are unlikely. Plus, she also told me the child wasn't mine. According to her, she got pregnant a couple of weeks after what happened with us. I lost contact with her a few weeks later, but still, she had my name and contact information. A few months ago, she popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook because her number was still in my phone. I think the child looks a little like me, but I'm not sure if I'm just being paranoid. I have just kept wondering, what if the wrong guy is raising the child? Or no one is and she just never told me. I don't know what would happen. I don't know if I would want to, or even if I could be in the child's life. Probably I'll never know. Story 6. I left my wife and 2 kids because I was forced into an arranged marriage that I hated from day one. Being Middle Eastern made it difficult for me to leave my wife before we had kids without my family turning their backs on me. We had 2 kids, mostly because we were pressured by our families. I hated my wife. She hated me also. I wouldn't even be surprised if she had slept with someone else to have those kids. I cheated on her regularly, including with her cousin. Her cousin told me, well before I had an affair with her, that my wife was cheating on me. When our daughter was born, I became distant. My mom took care of the baby most of the time. After my son was born, I filed for divorce. My wife wouldn't agree to it because our Middle Eastern culture makes divorcees look like scum. Instead, she took the 2 kids and moved back to England. I remarried and now have 2 more kids. I haven't seen my first 2 kids in over 10 years. Last I heard, they are doing well in high school. I honestly don't care. I don't even know them. I've also been told my ex-wife is still single because our culture makes divorced women look like undesirable individuals. I am aware I sound terrible, but honestly, I am a product of my environment. I am tired of foreign parents coming to America, having kids here, and then expect us to share the same mentality as them, even though we were born in America. All my friends are married to the people they wanted to marry. I was forced to marry a woman who I couldn't even stand to be around with. My proven kids are 8 and 7. I am with them all the time. I don't ever plan to leave them. My wife is the love of my life. She was a good friend from middle school who I lost contact with, but eventually reconnected via Facebook. We are happy. She is also a first generation Middle Eastern American, so we both have a lot in common. Story 7. I had been dating this girl for about 3 years when she got pregnant and had our son. Our relationship had its ups and downs, but was alright for the most part. I was playing poker semi professionally at the time and still had a part time job. I didn't have investments or savings, it was all in my poker bankroll. I had about $60,000 in cash in our apartment, which I kept in paper bags in a safe. I kick myself every day for not just putting it in a bank. But I was worried about taxes. Every time I reached $10,000 in a bag, I would put an elastic around it and start a new one. I had a horrid run of cards over the course of a few months, and when the money finally ran out, I had to open one of my sealed bags. To my complete shock, there was only about $4,500 in it. I opened the others, and they were all missing 70 to 90% of their contents. I was left with just over $13,000 when I should have had 60,000. My girlfriend was the only one who knew about the safe. I have no idea how she got the combination. She confessed that she had been stealing from me for over a year, taking a few hundred here, a few hundred there. She took trips with her friends to the mountains, Mexico, and Las Vegas, all on my dime. What got me was her attitude. After 2 minutes of apologizing, she was done. Then it was like, it's no big deal. You can always make more money. And we are a common law couple. We're supposed to share everything. When I kept pressing and pressing to find out where the $47,000 went, she finally snapped and showed her true colors. Textbook sociopath. When she went to work the next day, I took our 1-year-old to her parents, packed up my clothes, and left. The apartment was in her name, and I didn't care about the furnishings. I left her a note saying to F herself and to never contact me again. I moved across the country the following week to pursue poker full time in Las Vegas, but unfortunately, that didn't work out. I was playing with scared money, and any profits I made got wiped out by the high cost of living. After about half a year there, I took my remaining money to Southeast Asia, where my plan was to live a hedonistic lifestyle until the money ran out or the bank wouldn't lend me any more credit. Then I would end it all. I have been here in Southeast Asia ever since. My life back home is such a distant memory it doesn't even feel real anymore. I am 32 years old. I have about $4,000 to my name, and I make $500 to $800 a month from internet poker to pay my expenses. My life is a complete mess, and I will be surprised if I make it to see my 35th birthday. Story 8. I have a reasonably high profile career and went through a contentious divorce. Neither of us was perfect, and we weren't suited for each other. Nonetheless, here's what I experienced. I was married for 4 years and have been divorced now for over 7 years. I had a prenuptial agreement with my former spouse. I came into the marriage with substantial assets and income, and she was a career woman as well. We had 2 sons born 2 years apart. I filed for divorce after spending over a year in marital counseling. It wasn't going to work for many reasons, and I knew it. I retained legal counsel and tried to pursue a civilized separation, divorce, and shared custody arrangement. I purchased another home to live in, within 5 miles of the home I owned, and allowed her to continue residing in with our sons. That home was purchased before our marriage and was in my name only. I wanted to let her stay there to keep things friendly for our sons. Then, things started to escalate within 60 days of my filing for formal separation and divorce. 1. False accusations of spousal abuse. My attorney had warned me this might happen, so I installed security cameras on the exterior of the house and added several to the interior common areas of the family home, which I still owned. I was arrested no fewer than 4 times, with charges dismissed each time because I was in completely different locations when she accused me. The cameras filmed her hitting my car repeatedly with a hammer, smashing my windows, and trying to assault me when I returned our sons after a long weekend. I never touched her, but she still was able to have me arrested on her word alone. 2. Vandalism. She repeatedly vandalized my new home and tried to break in, all caught on security cameras. She also vandalized my attorney's home and office. 3. Going through my trash, also caught on security cameras. 4. Refusing to turn over our sons. She repeatedly refused to hand over our sons at the scheduled times. 5. Stalking and harassment. She stalked a new girlfriend I had a year after I was divorced, harassing her at work and even breaking into her home and leaving notes. 6. Assault. She assaulted a process server in broad daylight with a can of pepper spray and held a 9mm gun to his head while he was on his knees. The news coverage of her arrest for this was both entertaining and frightening. 7. Trying to ruin my business relationships. She called my office repeatedly to disrupt my business. 8. Harassment of my extended family. She harassed my family, including my brothers and parents, with letters and calls. 9. Non-compliance with custody arrangements. 10. Psychological evaluation. My legal counsel required a psychological evaluation of both of us to gain some footing. She lied to the psychologist, but we proved it, and the report was very favorable to me, which the judge ruled accordingly. 11. Taking the children out of state. She left the state with our sons to visit friends in different states to avoid turning them over. 12. Child support order. After 3 years of court battles, the judge gave me a child support order against her after officially transferring custody to me. 13. She contested the prenuptial agreement and lost. 14. Continued harassment and false claims. She assaulted me, hired private detectives to harass me, and even claimed I left dead animals on the doorstep of the house she was living in, the house I still owned. There were other occurrences, but you get the idea. For nearly 5 years and over $400,000 in legal fees, I fought through the family court system. Despite a contempt and an arrest warrant issued with a $100,000 bail for the transfer of custody, it was never enforced, as it was not served to the local police. I realized that the system saw me as disposable because I was a man, and I knew her next move would be to accuse me of worse. At the next court appearance, I met with the judge and informed him that I was done and would never return to family law court. My attorney agreed with my decision, and I knew I'd never see my sons again. I couldn't continue subjecting myself and my children to her chaos. My parents were heartbroken, but they understood. It broke me to know I'd miss every birthday, holiday, and important event. I hide it well, but I know I'll never be a father again. This experience showed me how the system marginalizes fathers. Ironically, about a year and a half ago, I found my ex-wife following me in another city. I confronted her and later filed a restraining order. I also got her evicted from the house she destroyed, costing me over $100,000 in repairs. All of this supposedly because she loved me. I will never marry again. My girlfriend understands that marriage is off the table. If my sons contact me someday, I'll tell them to seek answers from their mother. I have nothing left for them. The court system doesn't care about the rights of men, and I will never risk putting myself in harm's way again. Men should protect themselves with prenuptial agreements and a viable exit strategy. Marriage is a dangerous proposition for men, and I wish I had known then what I know now. I advise men to spend a few days in family court to see the damage and cost involved before considering marriage. Well, if you like the stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. Bye!